What's your emergency?
I killed him. He was hurting our sister.
I'm your host, and what you're about to hear is a fictional true crime story that explores one of the most complex moral dilemmas imaginable. While this case never actually happened, it's inspired by real-world situations that force us to confront uncomfortable truths about how we protect our children and what happens when the system fails. The Martinez story isn't just about a single night of violence. It's about months of terror, a family torn apart by secrets, and two teenage boys who believed they were their sister's only hope. Before we dive in, I need to warn you, this case involves detailed discussions of child abuse. If you're not in the right headspace for that today, please take care of yourself first. The story will be here when you're ready. For everyone else, let's go back to the beginning, to a quiet neighborhood in Phoenix, Arizona, where the perfect family was hiding the darkest of secrets. The Martinez family seemed like a true American success story. Sarah Martinez, a dedicated nurse at Phoenix General Hospital, had raised her two sons as a single mother for years. Jake was 18, a senior in high school with college plans. Danny, 16, was the quiet one, thoughtful, protective, always watching out for others. Their father had left when Danny was just 3 years old, leaving Sarah to work double shifts to keep their small family afloat. For years, it was just the three of them against the world. Then Mike Stevens entered their lives. Mike worked as a hospital administrator at Phoenix General. He was 42, divorced, and seemed genuinely interested in becoming part of their family. He was stable financially, something Sarah desperately needed. He was patient with the boys, attended Danny's basketball games, helped Jake with college applications. After 2 years of dating, Sarah and Mike married in a small ceremony in the summer of 2021. By then, little Emma was already part of their lives. She was Mike's daughter from his previous marriage, and at 8 years old, she was the light of everyone's world. Mike had full custody of Emma. Her biological mother had signed away her parental rights years earlier. Something that should have been a red flag, but Sarah was so focused on building a stable home that she didn't ask the right questions. To the outside world, they were the perfect blended family. Mike coached Emma's soccer team. Sarah worked hard to provide for everyone. Jake was the responsible older brother, Danny was the gentle middle child, and Emma was the precious baby sister they all adored. But perfection, as we know, is often just a carefully constructed lie. The cracks in their perfect family began to show in small ways. Ways that only someone who truly loved Emma would notice. And Jake Martinez loved his little sister more than life itself. It started in the fall of 2022, about a year after Mike officially became Emma's father and moved into their home permanently. Emma had always been a bright, bubbly child. She loved school, loved playing with friends, loved family movie nights where she'd curl up between Jake and Danny on the couch. She was fearless, the kind of kid who would climb the highest tree in the backyard just to prove she could. But something began to change. The nightmares started first. Not just bad dreams, screaming, sobbing nightmares that would wake up the entire house. Night after night, Emma would wake up terrified, calling for her brothers, never for Mike, never for her mom who was often working late shifts. Jake, whose bedroom was next to Emma's, became her unofficial night shift guardian. He'd sit by her bed until she fell back asleep, sometimes sleeping on her floor just so she'd feel safe. Then came the regression. Emma, who had been potty trained since she was 3, suddenly started having accidents. She began wetting the bed regularly, something that hadn't happened in years. Sarah, exhausted from pulling double shifts at the hospital, assumed it was just adjustment stress. New family dynamics, starting 2nd grade, typical childhood phases. She bought rubber sheets and promised Emma it would pass. But Jake noticed other things. Disturbing things. Emma stopped wanting to be alone with Mike. She'd suddenly remember homework that needed to be done whenever her mom was leaving for work. She'd insist on staying in Jake or Danny's room during family movie nights, even when Mike patted the couch beside him, calling her his special girl. She flinched when adults touched her, even innocent hugs from teachers or family friends. She became obsessed with privacy, insisting on locked bathroom doors and getting upset when anyone came into her room without knocking first. Most disturbing of all, Emma developed an intense fear of bedtime. She'd find excuses to stay up later, needing water, needing the bathroom, needing just one more story. Anything to delay going to her room. Jake started paying closer attention. What he discovered made his blood run cold. Mike had a routine of tucking Emma in every single night. Even when Sarah was home, even when Emma protested that she was too old for tucking in, Mike insisted it was their special time together. These tuck-ins lasted longer than they should have. Sometimes 30 minutes, sometimes an hour. And always behind a closed door. When Jake tried to suggest that maybe Emma was getting too old for such elaborate bedtimes, Mike's response was swift and aggressive. "I'm her father now. I decide what's appropriate for my daughter." The possessiveness in his voice, the way he emphasized "my daughter," made Jake's skin crawl. But it was what Emma whispered to him one February night that confirmed his worst fears and set in motion the events that would destroy their family forever. February 14, 2023. Valentine's Day. Sarah was working a double shift at the hospital. Holiday pay was too good to pass up. Mike had been drinking since dinner, which was becoming increasingly common on nights when Sarah worked late. Jake was in his room studying when he heard Emma crying. Not just crying, the kind of desperate, terrified sobbing that makes your heart stop. He found her in her bed, sheets soaked with sweat, trembling with fear. Another nightmare. But this one seemed different, more intense. "Hey, Em," Jake whispered, sitting on the edge of her bed. "It's okay. You're safe. It was just a bad dream." Emma looked at him with eyes that seemed far too old for an 8-year-old face. "Jake," she whispered, "I don't want Daddy Mike to come say goodnight anymore." The way she said it, the fear, the shame, the desperate hope that maybe, finally, someone would understand. Jake knew immediately that they weren't talking about nightmares anymore. "Emma," he said carefully, his heart pounding, "what happens when Daddy Mike says goodnight?" What Emma told him next would haunt Jake for the rest of his life. She spoke in broken whispers, the way children do when they're trying to explain something they don't have words for. She talked about special games that Mike played with her. About how he told her these games were normal, that all daddies played them with their daughters. About how he said it was their special secret and that bad things would happen to the family if she ever told anyone. She talked about being afraid to fall asleep because she never knew when Mike would come back to her room after everyone else was sleeping. About how he told her that if she ever told Mommy would be so upset that she might have to go away to the hospital forever. Emma was 8 years old. She had no framework for understanding what was happening to her, only the knowledge that it felt wrong and scary and that she was powerless to stop it. Jake sat there listening to his baby sister describe her abuse, and something fundamental broke inside him. This wasn't just his worst fear confirmed, this was his worst fear being infinitely worse than he'd imagined. But Emma wasn't done. Through her tears, she told Jake something else that made his blood freeze. He said if I tell anyone, he'll have to play the special games with other little girls too. He said he knows lots of little girls who need a daddy. Jake understood the threat. Mike wasn't just abusing Emma, he was using the threat of abusing other children to keep her silent. That night, after Emma finally fell asleep, Jake sat in his room shaking with rage and terror. He now carried the weight of knowledge that would change everything. But what could he do with it? The next morning, Jake told Danny everything. Danny's reaction was immediate and visceral. The gentle, quiet 16-year-old who rarely raised his voice or showed anger became someone Jake had never seen before. "We have to kill him," were Danny's first words. "Danny, wait, no, Jake. Listen to me. He's been raping our sister. Our 8-year-old sister. 4 months. Maybe longer. We have to kill him." But Jake, despite his rage, forced himself to think practically. They couldn't just commit murder. There had to be another way. They spent the next 3 weeks researching their options, and what they found was devastating. Child abuse cases are notoriously difficult to prosecute. Children Emma's age are often deemed unreliable witnesses. The legal process can take months or years, during which time Emma would continue living under the same roof as her abuser. Even if Mike was arrested, he'd likely be released on bail. Even if he was convicted, the average sentence for child sexual abuse is just 5 to 7 years. And that's if they could prove it at all. But the brothers discovered something else in their research, something that made their decision feel inevitable. Mike had been married before Emma's mother. His first wife had filed for divorce when their daughter was 6 years old. In the divorce papers, which Jake found through online court records, there were allegations of inappropriate conduct with minor child. The case had been settled out of court. Mike's first wife had taken their daughter and moved across the country. She'd agreed to a sealed settlement in exchange for Mike signing away his parental rights. The system had already failed one child. Mike had already done this before. The brothers also discovered that Mike's ex-wife Emma's biological mother had filed similar allegations before signing away her parental rights. Another sealed settlement. Another child protected only by distance, not justice. Jake and Danny realized they weren't just dealing with an abuser, they were dealing with a predator who had perfected his methods over years, who knew how to manipulate the system, who had escaped consequences multiple times. They tried hinting to their mother about Mike's behavior, but Sarah was overwhelmed with work and genuinely seemed to believe Mike was a good father. When they suggested Emma seemed uncomfortable around Mike, Sarah dismissed it as typical adjustment issues. Mike loves Emma, Sarah would say. He's the only father she's ever really known. It's normal for there to be some awkwardness as she gets older. The brothers realized that even their own mother wouldn't believe them without concrete proof, and getting that proof would mean allowing Emma's abuse to continue. They were 18 and 16 years old, still children themselves, and the weight of protecting their sister fell solely on them. For 3 weeks, they watched Mike continue his nightly tuck-ins with Emma. They watched her fear grow. They watched her withdraw further into herself. And they planned. March 15, 2023, started like any other Wednesday. Sarah left for her evening shift at 6 p.m., kissing everyone goodbye and reminding the boys to help Emma with her homework. Mike had been drinking beer since he got home from work, something that happened more frequently when Sarah wasn't around. By 8 p.m., he'd finished a six-pack and opened a bottle of whiskey. Jake and Danny tried to keep Emma in the living room, playing board games, watching cartoons, anything to keep her visible and safe. But they couldn't protect her forever. At 9 p.m., Mike announced it was Emma's bedtime. The look of pure terror that crossed Emma's face was something both brothers would remember for the rest of their lives. She looked at them with desperate, pleading eyes, a child silently begging her protectors to save her. "I can help her get ready for bed," Jake offered quickly, standing up. "Sit down," Mike's voice had that dangerous edge it got when he'd been drinking. "I'm her father. I'll handle bedtime." Danny stood up too. "Mom asked us to help with Emma's routine when she's at work." That's when Mike's carefully constructed mask slipped completely. "You boys need to learn your place in this house," he snarled, grabbing Emma's arm roughly. "I'm the man here now. What I say goes." Emma started crying, not just tears, but the kind of terrified sobbing that comes from deep trauma. She looked back at her brothers as Mike started pulling her toward the hallway. "Please," she whispered. That single word broke something in both boys. Jake moved first, stepping between Mike and the hallway. "Let go of her. Get out of my way, boy." Mike's grip on Emma's arm tightened, and she cried out in pain. "You're hurting her," Danny said, moving to stand beside Jake. Mike laughed, a cruel, cold sound. "I haven't even started hurting her yet. But I'm about to teach all three of you a lesson about respect." The threat was clear. Not only was Mike going to continue abusing Emma, but he was going to escalate, possibly hurt the boys too. Jake later told police that in that moment, time seemed to slow down. He could see Emma's terrified face, could hear her desperate crying, could see Mike's drunken rage building to something dangerous. All those weeks of research, all those sleepless nights planning, all that anger and fear and desperation, it all crystallized into one clear thought: this ends tonight. Jake moved toward the hall closet where they kept sports equipment. Mike, still gripping Emma's arm, tried to block his path. "You think you can threaten me in my own house?" Mike shoved Jake hard enough to send him stumbling backward. That's when Danny snapped. He lunged forward, trying to grab Emma away from Mike. Mike backhanded the 16-year-old across the face hard enough to split his lip and send him crashing into the wall. Emma screamed. Jake grabbed the baseball bat from the closet. "Let her go," Jake said, his voice deadly calm. Mike looked at the bat, then at Jake's face, and for the first time seemed to realize the danger he was in. But instead of backing down, his drunken arrogance took control. "You don't have the balls, boy." Mike raised his hand toward Emma again, whether to hit her or grab her, Jake would never know. Jake swung the bat. The first blow caught Mike in the shoulder, spinning him around and causing him to release Emma. He stumbled but didn't fall, turning toward Jake with murderous rage in his eyes. "You little idiot," Mike snarled, blood running from his mouth. Jake swung again. This time, the bat connected with Mike's skull with a sound that both boys would hear in their nightmares for years to come. Mike Stevens collapsed to the hallway floor and didn't get back up. For several minutes, the house was completely silent except for Emma's quiet crying. Jake stood over Mike's motionless body, still holding the bat. Danny pulled Emma close, checking her for injuries, whispering that she was safe now. It was Jake who finally called 911. "I need to report a death," he said calmly when the operator answered. "Sir, what happened?" "I killed my stepfather. He was abusing my sister." When police arrived at 9:47 p.m., they found a scene that would become one of the most debated crime scenes in recent memory. Mike Stevens was dead from blunt force trauma to the head. Jake Martinez stood over the body, making no attempt to flee or hide evidence. Danny sat on the living room couch with Emma in his arms, both of them in shock but physically unharmed. The boys didn't try to lie or create an alibi. Jake immediately confessed to killing Mike. When asked why, his answer was simple: he was molesting my sister. I had to stop him. Emma was taken to the hospital for examination. The physical evidence of sexual abuse was undeniable and horrific. The medical examiner would later testify that the abuse had been ongoing for months and was escalating in severity. When Sarah Martinez arrived home from her shift to find police cars in her driveway, her world collapsed completely. In one night, she'd lost her husband and faced losing her sons to the criminal justice system. The community reaction was immediate and divided. Some saw Jake and Danny as heroes who protected their sister when the system failed. Others saw them as cold-blooded killers who chose violence over proper legal channels. But the story was far from over. The legal proceedings took nearly a year. The district attorney faced an unprecedented decision: how do you prosecute teenagers who were protecting a child from abuse? The prosecution argued that regardless of motive, Jake had committed premeditated murder. They pointed out that the brothers had weeks to contact authorities, to tell teachers, to find legal solutions. The defense painted a different picture. They brought in expert witnesses who testified about the reality of child abuse reporting, about how the system consistently fails vulnerable children, about the psychological trauma that makes it nearly impossible for young victims to speak up. They presented evidence of Mike's previous abuse allegations, of his pattern of manipulating the legal system, of his threats against Emma and other potential victims. But the most powerful testimony came from Emma herself. In a closed courtroom session, with specially trained child advocates present, 9-year-old Emma Martinez told her story. The details remain sealed to protect her privacy, but sources close to the case say her testimony confirmed every detail of what Jake and Danny had told police. Emma's therapist testified that the child showed classic signs of complex trauma and that, in her professional opinion, the abuse would have continued to escalate if not stopped. The case became a national phenomenon. #Justice for Jake Martinez trended for months. Crowdfunding campaigns raised over $200,000 for their legal defense. Protests were held outside the courthouse every day of the trial. Signs reading "Jake protected Emma when no one else would" and "He's not a criminal, he's a hero" became symbols of a movement. Child abuse survivors shared their stories on social media, many saying they wished they'd had brothers like Jake and Danny to protect them. But there were just as many people calling for the boys to face adult murder charges, arguing that vigilante justice cannot be tolerated in a civilized society. After 3 weeks of testimony and 2 days of deliberation, the verdict came down. Jake Martinez was found guilty of voluntary manslaughter and sentenced to 12 years in juvenile detention, eligible for parole at age 21. Danny was sentenced to 5 years for accessory after the fact. The sentences were significantly lighter than what the prosecution had sought, but still meant Jake would spend some of the most formative years of his life behind bars. But the story doesn't end with the sentencing. Within months of Jake's imprisonment, the #FreeJakeMartinez movement exploded beyond social media into real-world action. Celebrity advocates joined the cause. Legal experts wrote op-eds questioning the justice of imprisoning a teenager who was protecting his sister. Protests grew larger and more organized. Outside the courthouse, outside the juvenile detention center, outside the state capitol building. The public pressure was immense. After 18 months of appeals and public outcry, Jake Martinez was granted clemency. He walked out of juvenile detention at age 20 to crowds of supporters and international media coverage. Danny completed his sentence and was released 6 months later. Today, both brothers are rebuilding their lives. Jake is studying criminal justice, hoping to work in child protection services. Danny is training to become a counselor specializing in trauma recovery. Emma, now 10 years old, continues to heal with the help of therapy and the unwavering support of her brothers. She's become a young advocate for other abuse survivors, speaking at children's safety events with a courage that amazes everyone who meets her. Sarah Martinez has dedicated her life to child abuse prevention, speaking at conferences about the warning signs she missed and the systemic changes needed to protect vulnerable children. The Martinez case changed laws in 3 states, making it easier for children to report abuse and requiring better training for professionals who work with children. But the biggest question remains: when the system fails, when adults don't listen, when children are left to protect themselves, what choices do they really have? Jake Martinez answered that question on a March night in 2023. Whether you see him as a hero or a killer, one thing is undeniable. Emma Martinez is alive and safe today because her brothers loved her enough to sacrifice everything to protect her. Sometimes, the most profound acts of love look like violence. Sometimes, the most moral choice is the illegal one. And sometimes, justice comes not from courtrooms, but from the fierce love of family. This has been the story of Jake and Danny Martinez, 2 brothers who decided that protecting their sister was worth any price, including their freedom. Until next time.